Welcome, everyone, to the Digitizing Hidden Collections, Amplifying Unheard Voices recipient webinar. We're going to begin today with a short presentation. Then following the presentation, we'll be back on live to answer some questions and have some conversations. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the recipient informational webinar for the Digitizing Hidden Special Collections Amplifying Unheard Voices program. We want to begin by congratulating you all again on being selected as grant recipients for this program. Yours is a varied and remarkable collection of projects. We know how much work has gone into them already. We are so excited to see these projects progress over the coming months and years. During today's session, we'll briefly explain what you may need to know as your grant project begins. We'll be covering the following topics. In part 1, we'll talk about CLIR, our team and you, the 2024 recipients of Digitizing Hidden Collections Amplifying Unheard Voices grant. In part 2, we'll transition to grant management and discuss grant modifications and reporting requirements. We'll cover how to make changes to your project and how and when to report on activities. In part 3, we'll discuss ways to stay in touch throughout your project and answer any questions you may have. Feel free to type your questions into the question and answer box or Q&A box at any point, and we'll address them during the third portion of this session. We especially want to welcome staff who may not oversee these projects, but will work on them daily. It's really important to us that you hear about all of these details too, so that you understand how your work fits into your organization's grant and the larger cultural heritage preservation efforts at CLIR. So with that, let's get started. We'll start our time together with some introductions, first to this platform, and then to CLIR and everyone here.
To start off, we want to share some notes about how you can use Zoom during this session. A live transcript is being generated if you'd like to utilize it. To turn on this feature, click the CC Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Attendees will be muted throughout the presentation. However, you're welcome to use chat for general introductions and conversation. If a chat box isn't already displaying on your Zoom screen, you can hover your mouse towards the bottom of the screen and open it manually. In order to send a message to everyone, remember to change the default from host and panelists to everyone. Because of how busy chat can get, we ask that you use the separate Q&A box to ask questions today, which can be opened the same way as the chat box. You can submit questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. If you're following along with questions as they come in, you can upvote them if they're similar to your own to let us know that it would be helpful to you to have them answered live. The session recording and transcript will be made available on the Manage and Award page of our website within a week. CLIR's work is accomplished by a relatively small staff of about 20 geographically distributed individuals. Today's webinar is led by the grants team, which administers CLIR's active regranting programs, offering support for the entire grant cycle from application to final report. Some or all of you may already know us from applicant webinars or from email exchanges, but we'll do some quick introductions. Sharon Burney, Program Officer, Midlothian, Virginia, is contributing to the presentation and Q&A. Allison Pope, Program Officer, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, is contributing to the presentation and Q&A. Jane Larson, Program Associate, Pittsburgh, PA, is contributing to the presentation and Q&A support. Louisa Quasigra, Managing Director, Chicago, Illinois, is contributing to Zoom logistics and Q&A support. Lizzie Albert, Deputy Operations Officer, Washington, D.C., is contributing to Zoom logistics and Q&A support. Our team would like to center today's conversation by acknowledging that as residents of the United States, we are speaking to you from unceded land of many Indigenous peoples. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize the original and current caretakers of the land, water, and air where I live, the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples and all of their ancestors and descendants. I am grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on their homelands and ask you to join me in acknowledging all Indigenous communities, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. May this acknowledgement remind us of our shared commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. On this slide, we've listed all the organizations participating in awarded grants this cycle. You are a broadly experienced and talented group, and we know that there are many others who are helping you as partners and collaborators too. You will often hear us refer to you as the program's 2024 grant recipients of Amplifying Unheard Voices, AUV, Cohort 2. Please feel free to introduce yourself and your role and your favorite TV show at the moment in the chat. Land acknowledgements for the area where you live or work are also most welcome.
For those new to CLIR, we like to begin with a reminder of our mission. The Council on Library and Information Resources, or CLIR, is an independent nonprofit organization that forges strategies to enhance research, teaching, and learning environments in collaboration with libraries, cultural institutions, and communities of higher learning. So what does that all mean? CLIR takes on a number of roles, including publishing research, convening meetings, and running programs. As an independent nonprofit, we are not part of the federal government. We are also not a private foundation. Our activities are not funded by an endowment, but rather by a combination of grants and sponsorships, which give us the flexibility to operate our programs a bit differently than government funders or private foundations. The Digitizing Hidden Collections program is a regranting program, which means the funds for your projects were awarded as part of a grant to CLIR from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. CLIR reapplies periodically to Mellon for funds to operate the Hidden Collections program and award new grants. So we can completely empathize with all of the work that you put in to get here. Digitizing Hidden Collections is just one of many programs administered by CLIR, and it is generously supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. In 2021, with the Foundation's support, the program transitioned to a new thematic focus, Amplifying Unheard Voices. There are many metrics by which the program measures its progress, including but absolutely not limited to the number of funded projects, awarded funds, and digitization outputs. As a historical overview, since the program began in 2015, CLIR has awarded $32.9 million to fund 133 projects and generate more than 10.2 million master digital files. 33 of those projects were funded through Amplifying Unheard Voices, and the program is currently in its third award cycle. We also want to shout out a community facilitated by another CLIR program, the Digital Library Federation. There are more than 10 amazing working groups coordinated by DLF, where practitioners meet regularly on a variety of digital library topics. A couple I want to point out in particular are the Metadata Support Group, which runs a Slack space for folks dealing with metadata, and the Digital Accessibility Working Group, who are currently offering accessibility audits of websites and systems, which you can contribute to or take advantage of. DLF's working groups are open to everyone and meet regularly.
Finally, one last resource we would like to share is the Digitizing Special Formats Wiki. This is a project of DLF and contains a growing collection of resources about planning and executing digitization projects. If there are additional resources you think would be helpful to include on the guide, it's an ever-evolving document open for contributions. Just email us at hiddencollections@clir.org and we'll pass along your suggestions. Now that you know who we are and the range of things we do as an organization, we will move into a discussion about some key administrative information for you as the latest recipients of Digitizing Hidden Special Collections, Amplifying Unheard Voices grants. We realize that this webinar will contain a lot of information that may not seem relevant now, but we'll be sharing the recording and transcript online so that you can reference it later or share it with others. In this next section, we'll describe processes for grant modifications and reporting requirements. Although we hope and expect that project activities listed in your approved proposals will be executed as described, we understand that unanticipated issues can arise. These may require that you deviate from the original plans you submitted. We realize that many of you will face operational hurdles that may cause delays. We hope you understand that our job is to support your teams as you encounter the unexpected during your project timelines. Some project changes won't require pre-approval from CLIR, such as a change in project staff other than the principal investigators or small shifts in budget expenditures. Generally, such small changes can be addressed in a project's interim narrative and financial reports. However, changes that affect the underlying terms of the grant must receive prior approval by CLIR. Examples include extensions of the project end date, changes to PIs, any changes to the collections being digitized through the project, and significant budget reallocations. Modification requests are common for this program, and you should not hesitate to ask us for what you need to do to successfully complete your project. Program staff can always be reached by email at hiddencollections@clir.org. To move forward with a modification, CLIR has an online form through which recipients can initiate modification requests.
Access to the grant modification and extension request form is available through a link at the top of the Manage and Award page. The form will always be available on this page and is designed to allow for the submission of multiple types of modification requests. The form includes sections on descriptive information, questions about extension requests, other types of modification requests, and a space to provide a brief explanation and justification of the modification. Once the form has been submitted and received, you should hear from CLIR staff within 2 weeks. For that reason, if you find you need a modification, it is important to request at least 1 to 3 months before the final end date for your grant. Some modifications, such as changes in principal investigators, should be requested immediately rather than waiting until the end of your project. Project end dates were included in the grant agreement, and if you ever need a reminder of your project end date or award number, just ask program staff. In many cases, completing the form will be all you need to do to seek approval for a modification. However, under certain circumstances, additional documentation may be required in order to move forward with the request. The guidelines for the modification request vary slightly between CLIR's different grant programs. So be sure to check the Manage and Award page for the most up-to-date information. If you have any questions about the process, CLIR staff is always available via email through our program email address, hiddencollections@clir.org. In order for you to prepare the necessary information for the modification request, we also provide a grant modification form template, also available on the Manage and Award page and displayed on this slide. The online form does involve some question logic, so you may not be required to answer all of the questions on the template, depending on how you answer others. A link is provided at the top of the document that allows you to create a personal copy of the template that you can share with anyone you're collaborating with. All modification requests should be submitted through the online form, so you will need to copy and paste your prepared responses into that space. No-cost extension requests are exactly what they sound like, a request to push back the project end date and final report without requesting additional funding. These may be requested in the case of unforeseen project delays, which may include prolonged personnel searches, staff turnover, delays when working with a vendor partner, illnesses, or delays caused by institutional infrastructure issues. No-cost extensions should be requested between 1 to 3 months prior to a project's end date. The reason we ask you to wait until these final months is that only one no-cost extension can be granted per project, and we have found that requests made closer to the end date provide more accurate estimates of the amount of extra time that's actually needed. We encourage you to take time now to set a calendar reminder for your team for your end date and for 3 months before the end of your project, so you'll know when it's time to request an extension if you need one. You may also want to set similar reminders for your annual, interim, and final reporting deadlines. Keep in mind that your end date and your final reporting deadlines are 2 different dates. The end date is the point at which all your work on your project must be completed and all grant funds expended. You cannot spend grant funds after your end date without first being granted an extension. Your final reporting deadline is set later so that you have time to reflect upon your work and complete final accounting for your grant. It's important to note that extensions cannot be granted for projects whose end dates have already passed. We really cannot emphasize enough the importance of paying attention to your end date. The project end date typically comes 3 months before your final report deadline. Some people have been confused about this in the past. We recommend standard project extension lengths of 12 months. On the request form, you are also able to enter a custom date, but we may choose to make an alternative recommendation. In most cases, the modification form is often sufficient for staff to evaluate extension requests, but we may follow up to ask for additional information or documentation, such as a revised project plan, collections list, or project budget.
If one of the principal investigators, also known as PIs, changes during the grant, the grantee must inform CLIR immediately by completing the grant modification form. All of CLIR's grant management tasks, including setting up your grant management system to accept your reports, require current contact details for all principal investigators. So it's important we know when a principal investigator departs your organization and that their responsibilities have been transferred to someone else. In order to complete a change of PI, you will also be required to supply via email a letter on institutional letterhead from the head of your organization or department. The letter doesn't need to be long, but should include the name and title of the new PI, as well as the date the change will become effective. A CV for the new PI will also be required for our files. On occasion, grantees find it necessary to spend grant funds in a manner other than originally proposed in their application. Reallocations of grant funds are allowable, but these changes must be carefully reviewed and approved by CLIR staff prior to the reallocated funds being spent. To initiate this process, complete the grant modification form. Any proposed use of reallocated funds should be aligned with the original goals and scope of the project and within the current guidelines and limits for allowable and disallowed costs for the Hidden Collections program. As a rule of thumb, for smaller Hidden Collections projects defined as under $200,000, CLIR generally doesn't require notification for reallocations that amount to less than 5% of a project's total budget. Larger projects, those over $200,000, and all projects really, should contact CLIR about any reallocations that are over $10,000. When in doubt, just ask us or go ahead and complete the grant modification form. When completing the grant modification form, you'll be asked to provide the amount of funds remaining in the grant, how much of any of the original funds will remain at the close of the project, and a brief description of how the funds will be spent. CLIR program staff may request additional information, such as a revised project budget, to complete review of the request. All of this information can be found on the Manage and Award page. Should we update any of our grant modification procedures, we'll post the most up-to-date information there for your reference. Do be sure to share this webpage with all staff who may be involved in the management of your project. CLIR program staff are available to answer any of your questions related to modifications, so don't hesitate to reach out via our program email account. As we mentioned, modifications are not uncommon with this program, and we always seek to find ways to make your project successful. For more complicated grant modification requests, you may find it helpful to set up a conversation with a program officer prior to submitting your request. We'll be happy to talk through any possible changes.
At this point, we'll shift into a discussion of reporting requirements. Recipients of the Hidden Collections grant are required to submit reports, both narrative and financial, through our online system on or before the dates outlined in each of your grant agreements. If you don't have access to a copy of your letter and need to know your designated report dates or any other information related to your report, do let us know. Your first report is due a year and 2 months after the start date of your project, and then each interim report after that is due exactly 1 year after the previous one. Your final report is then due 3 months after your project end date. This means we should be receiving one report from you each year. If your project is only 12 months, You will submit your final report 3 months after the end date of your project. An email reminder from CLIR will be sent to the PIs and additional contacts that we have on file around a month prior to the due date for each of your annual interim reports and around 3 months prior to your project's end date. Your annual reports to CLIR are a deeply important part of the agreement between our grantees, CLIR, and our own funder, the Mellon Foundation. Our team compiles its own reports on the Hidden Collections program each year, which we submit to Mellon. This report also includes all of the reports we received from our recipients in the previous 12 months and communicates to Mellon the importance of the work that all of you are doing. Just a few more words on reporting. Reports are not only a way to help us keep up with your progress, but also a means for us to provide the best support to you as your project evolves. For instance, we may be able to connect you with others in the Hidden Collections community who have faced similar challenges as the ones you report facing. Your reports can also help us to help you identify and mitigate potential issues in advance. For example, we may notice from your reports that you may need a no-cost extension and can remind you of that process. However, if an issue is time-sensitive or if you have a specific question, we encourage you to reach out about it directly to program staff rather than waiting until your next report. If you find that your report is likely to be late due to circumstances beyond your control, which we know can happen, let us know as soon as possible. We are glad to work with our grantees in these situations, but it's important that we hear about them before your report is overdue. To submit your reports, you will use the same system, SurveyMonkey Apply or SM Apply, that your team used to apply for your grant. We've linked to that on this slide as well as on the Manage and Award page. All communication and reminders for reporting will be sent to the PIs on file, so if there are any others involved in the project work who need such notifications, you will need to send us names and contact information for those people. Please share this additional contact information as soon as possible so we can keep our records up to date. It is a good idea to log into SM Apply at your earliest convenience using the same email address and password you used to submit your application. If you use these same credentials, you should automatically see the reporting form for your project when logged in. If you forget these credentials or lose access to them for any reason, for example, if the person who created your application leaves your organization, you will need to contact us through the program email so that we can link your report to the correct credentials. One way to future-proof your team's access to the report would be to log in using the application credentials, hit Start to pretend like you're starting your report, then add other team members' email addresses as collaborators on your report. Collaborators will then receive an automatic invitation to verify their email addresses and create their own passwords to access the system. Once they accept the invitation and create their credentials, they will also be able to log in to view the report and enter data. One of the system safety measures ensures that only the proposal owner is able to submit a report. So if one of the collaborators eventually needs to submit, that person will need to contact us to make sure this can happen. Collaborators do not have to be limited to PIs. If your financial reporting is handled by a research office or grant manager, you may want to add them as well. Teams of collaborators working on project reports can also reference our collaborative Google Doc template for reports, available on the Manage and Award page. This document includes the questions you'll be expected to answer on the reporting form. Note that there are 3 different templates, one for 2015 to 2017 recipients, another for 2018 to 2020 recipients, and another for Amplifying Unheard Voices recipients. So be sure to use the correct template. Using the template, you have the option to begin working on your draft report as early as you would like. For now, we will just briefly cover the components of the report so that you are prepared with the relevant information you need when the time comes.
The report form is organized into 4 to 5 sections: general information, narrative assessment, quantitative assessment, financial assessment, final project assessment, final reports only. When writing your report, the first place to start is the final proposal you submitted to CLIR during the application process. All sections of the report should demonstrate the project's consistency with these original ideas. Of course, some variations are to be expected as the project adapts to real-life scenarios and new opportunities. Small differences between the planned approach and actual project work can be explained in the narrative report. However, as mentioned earlier, grantees will need to request grant modifications for more substantive changes, particularly those regarding the budget, timeline, or deliverables. Overall, it is important to demonstrate to CLIR and the Mellon Foundation that the scope and goals of the project continue to reflect the proposal selected for funding by CLIR's independent review panel. A beginning note that while the grants team has taken steps to simplify the reporting for this incoming cohort, if you are working through the report and need to take a break, just scroll to the bottom of whichever page you are on within the report form, and you'll find the option to save and continue editing. With that overview in mind, we're now going to do a quick walkthrough of the information you will be asked to include in your reports to CLIR. The first section of our report covers general information about the project, the grant reference number, which was provided in your grant agreement, project title, institution/organization, PIs, and contact information of persons submitting the report. The first three elements, grant reference number, project title, and institution/organization, will be pre-populated from your final application and cannot be edited. If you encounter any errors in that information, contact us at hiddencollections@clir.org to have it corrected. There will be additional sections of the report that are pre-populated from your final application, which we'll touch on shortly. These sections are also indicated in the aforementioned Google Docs reporting template with a black asterisk. So if you're working collaboratively in that document ahead of time, please remember that these will be areas that you do not need to fill out. Enter names and email addresses for current project PIs. Changing PIs will require a formal grant modification submission. If you have made any modifications or personnel changes, you'll want to mention this in the progress and impact questions under the narrative assessment.
The narrative assessment provides space for the project team to summarize your progress toward the project goals and objectives during the reporting period, emphasizing how this progress has exemplified the core values of the Amplifying Unheard Voices program: public knowledge, broad representation, authentic partnerships, sustainable infrastructures, and community-centered access. You will also want to discuss any challenges or setbacks you have experienced in this reporting period, and any strategies that have proven successful in addressing them. And finally, you'll want to describe your future plans for the remainder of the project. All questions in the assessment section have space for text-based responses and are word limited. The word limit is indicated above the text box. You may find it easier to draft your responses elsewhere, such as in the Google template, and paste them here rather than drafting and editing them in the report space. The system will generate an error when you try to save and move forward if you enter more words than are allowed in the form. The next section of the report form will ask for information about three things: the quantity and types of materials you proposed to digitize compared to what has actually been digitized during the reporting period, the preservation file formats and quantities proposed compared to what has actually been created during the reporting period, and information about the creation and accessibility of metadata records for the files you have created. To compare this part of the report, questions referring to the original quantities proposed will be pre-populated with the information you entered in your final application. These questions will be locked for editing and hidden from view until you choose a number of categories of source materials from the quantity dropdown. The instructions will indicate to you how many categories were originally proposed, so you don't have to remember. You'll be able to consult the figures you proposed, then share what you actually digitized during the reporting period. Begin by selecting the number of categories of source materials you actually digitized. Up to 10 categories are allowed, but unless you've added materials to your project plan, you will probably need the same number of categories you proposed, or fewer, if you haven't started working on some types of materials. Categories should match the order of the categories defined in your final application and those auto-generated within the report. Once the number of categories is entered, the same number of populated category fields will appear below. The questions regarding preservation file formats will be structured the same way, with the information regarding what you originally proposed pre-populated from your final application. Compiling these numbers will be much easier if you plan now to track them as your project proceeds. So setting up a shared document to do that will be something you'll thank yourself for later. CLIR does have an Excel template you can use for this if you wish. It's located on the Manage and Award page.
Next up is the financial assessment, which comes in two parts. The first is the financial narrative. In the narrative report, this is a place for you to comment on actual grant expenditures during the reporting period as they relate to your proposed budget. Every budget category should be at least mentioned here, and if there are any variances of 5% or more between projected and actual spending, make sure to include a detailed explanation of the reasons for that over or under expenditure. You should also discuss any approved budget modifications since your last report. The second part is the financial report, which is an upload using the same budget detail spreadsheet that you submitted with your proposal. The only difference is that you will have both the budgeted and actual fields filled in this time for the current reporting period instead of just the budgeted column. A budget template specific to your project was sent to project PIs and financial contacts via email and will also be attached to future report reminder emails. And this is the file you should edit and submit. If you have any budget reallocations or no-cost extensions approved in the course of your project, we will provide you with an updated financial report form to use that reflects the approved changes. This screenshot of the budget detail template is just a reminder of what this looks like. If you ever lose track of this file, email us and our team can provide you with a replacement. Note the field for investment income on this sheet. All CLIR grantees are expected to keep grant funds in a secure interest-bearing account and to report on interest income here. Interest earned on grant funds may be used to support direct costs for your project, so you should be prepared to indicate how much interest has been earned each period and how that interest has been spent. The template is cumulative and will be built upon over the course of the project. Grantees are expected to update this spreadsheet with the actual spending for the period in question, which may vary from the amount budgeted. Variances of more than 5% in any category must be explained in the financial narrative and may require a modification request to be submitted. When it comes time to submit your final report, as opposed to your interim reports, you will include a final project assessment, which has 4 required components. The final project narrative, which will be an overall assessment of your project, including the most significant outcomes, challenges, and lessons learned. The final financial narrative and report, which will show all actual expenses, interest earned, and indicate and explain any remaining award funds. These will have to be returned to CLIR as directed by CLIR's return funds policy. URLs or other instructions to access the digitized collections and metadata in any catalogs, repositories, or services you've used. And finally, a project manifest, which is a spreadsheet containing a sampling of URLs linking to actual digital files created through your project.
The project manifest is a spreadsheet which includes the names and locations of a representative sampling of the digital files, normally the access copies, as well as notations about any checksums and restrictions for those files. We're requiring this because we are using an automated tool, a kind of web crawler, that allows us to conduct periodic checks that the online files created through CLIR's digitization regranting programs remain, in fact, online. Note that CLIR's template for this has multiple tabs, including one with instructions, so be sure to read through all of them. Taking a look at this template now and building completion of this document into your workflow will help you save time later. For those of you who work with vendors, often your digitization vendor will return a spreadsheet to you that will be very similar to what you need to submit here. And you should be able to adapt the vendor spreadsheet for this template. If you work out your file naming conventions at the start of your project and ensure your vendor names your files exactly according to your needs, most of your work for this requirement will be done. If you leave it until the end, it might take some scrambling to pull it together. So we do strongly recommend coming up with a strategy for compiling this data during the course of the project work. Of all the pieces of the final report, this document is what allows us to verify that you have created all the deliverables agreed upon when you accepted the grant. This evidence is critical to our own reporting to the Mellon Foundation, so we really appreciate your help in making this possible for us. Once all tasks are completed in SML Apply for either the interim or final report, there is a final step necessary in order to submit your report to CLIR. Click the green Submit button once you have reviewed all answers and documents and are ready to submit. Once you hit Submit, the first time you will be prompted to hit Submit again or given one last chance to review. A quick warning, if you choose Review, then you are presented with all of the content associated with the application, initial application, final application, and all related forms and reports. You'll need to scroll down a bit to see the newly completed task if you'd like to review the parts of the report you've just completed. As we mentioned, there can be multiple collaborators within one project reporting space. However, only the application owner is given the option to submit. If you have completed the report and need to submit it to CLIR but do not see the option to submit, that indicates that you are not the application owner. Contact Hidden Collections at clir.org to complete submission for you in instances where the application owner is not available to do so, or if the project team is unsure who owns the application. We all know that was a lot of information, but we've now reached the final section of our presentation to share some brief information about modes of communication before we turn over to questions and discussion. CLIR's website contains quite a lot of information for you as you move into your grant recipient role. Just as you may have used the resources of the Apply for Award page during the grant writing process, we have a similar page, the Manage an Award page, that we've talked about quite a lot today as you work through your project. Here you will find information on the grant modification and reporting process that we discussed earlier. Additionally, contact information for the CLIR's grants team, templates, and information on citing CLIR are all contained on this page. On the Funded Projects page, you can find descriptions of each of the projects that have been funded by the Hidden Collections program to date. If you have not already done so, please proofread the summary of your project that's currently posted there and send us any proposed changes. On the CLIR's policy page, you will find the acknowledgement guidelines for recipients of grants or fellowships. If discussing CLIR in press releases, you will want to review these guidelines. The best way to contact us is through the Hidden Collections at clir.org email inbox. We also love to hear about your progress. So if you're sharing updates on X or Instagram, please feel free to tag us or use hashtag DigHC so we can repost. If there's something you would like us to share directly with our followers, just email the team. We love to be able to spread the word about the amazing work you're doing. We also try to share your news in CLIR's Grants and Program newsletter. So check out the website for details on how to subscribe to that if you haven't already done so.
Thank you all for joining us at our webinar today. We know that we've covered a lot of material. We'll now shift to answering any questions you've submitted during our presentation.
Okay, it looks like the first one we have is, can you still request an extension if you have a 3-year project? Yes, all projects can request a no-cost extension. As a reminder, though, you should request a no-cost extension no earlier than 1 to 3 months prior to your project end date. So that will vary based on the length of your projects.
Do we need to let CLIR know if the proposed schedule for a project activity changes? on the work plan. The activity will still take place, but on a shifted timeline. No, we don't need to know about like swaps in workflow if they're still taking place within the proposed timeline. It may be something that you want to address in an interim or final report just to explain why, so that it can be passed along to other recipients as perhaps things can go better in this order than that. But you don't need to alert us of those changes.
Yeah, and also to add on to that, the grant modification project process is primarily for unexpected changes in your project that are due to maybe vendor delays, a change in infrastructure, and variances in reallocations that are over like 5% of the total budget. And speaking of budget, Allison, you want to handle the next question?
Could you please clarify or provide more information about interest-bearing accounts? Hidden collections, because of the size of the awards, has a requirement that you put them into interest-bearing accounts unless you're expending them upfront to vendors, in order for you to capitalize on that chunk of money. Interest earned can be used for any project activity. So if you find that you have an overage in a vendor for outsourced digitization or something of the like, you can use those funds to cover. If you get to the end of a project and you have interest funds and you've met all your deliverables, you may want to look at doing some more outreach activities or the like to expend those funds. They are under the umbrella of the return of funds policy, which requires that money over $100 left at the end of the project be returned to CLIR. Also, a quick note on budgets, very minor, but to our Canadian recipients, I realized yesterday our budget details expect you to put the dates in the American format. And if y'all do not do that, there will be some very minor bits of the budget detail that will not work properly for you. So you may want to use the American format. Sorry about that. We can't set Excel to accept them both.
Speaking of budgets, please use the budgets that we send you whenever you do your reports. If you don't, they'll go havoc and they won't make sense.
Sharon, do you want to take the next one? Do you want me to take that one?
Sorry. Our grant is in Canada. We have received more funds than estimated in our budget after we exchange from US dollars to Canadian dollars. How should we report the use of these funds? Will a budget reallocation request be needed? No, we understand that this happens. That's why we asked in the application process that you use US dollars to Canadian dollars, US dollars in your budget. We understand that this is going to happen because of the currency exchange. So always start with the amount that we awarded you in US dollars.
Yeah, and that's something you can just address in your financial narrative and financial reporting. You would have the same return of funds policy at the end, where if you have an overage more than $100, you would return that to CLIR. But you would be able to use some of those funds if you end up with overages in the project workflow.
And just put that in your reporting. I can get this one. We have a transition for the dean of our college. The dean was for the lead organization, not a PI. Do we need to report this change, and should we share the interim dean info or just the final info once a dean is selected? If they're not a PI on the project, I don't think we need to know. If they're the additional contact, then yes, you could put that information, but usually an additional contact on our applications are financial officers or connected. So no, we don't need to know that the new dean. If you have a change in PI, then that new dean would sign the PI change form that would be required in the modification request.
I'm going to give a few more minutes. I think we have answered what we've gotten thus far.
Yeah, no more questions?
There's one question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I can clarify. The interest component is a part of the return of funds policy. And if you look at the budget detail, there's a line that goes across in the top section where you would enter income interest. So you'll kind of see how it tabulates all of that on the right-hand side to tell you what's left.
Besides, okay, we have another question. Another couple, right? Okay, so let's see, next question. Our secondary PI has left the organization and will not be replaced. Is it necessary to have a second PI? The primary PI and application contact have stayed the same. No, it's not necessary to have a secondary PI. You can have up to 3 PIs, but you can't have just one. However, you will need to put in a modification request that lets us know that that PI has left the organization. And it will require you to send a letter on institutional letterhead that states that this person has left and the date that they left the project. If you were adding a new PI, then you would also put that information in and a resume of the new PI that would replace them.
Can funds be invested to mature annually and therefore would not be quarterly earnings to be reported for the first year? Yeah, we don't, it is a pass along from Mellon, the requirement that the funds are placed in interest-bearing accounts. We don't really stipulate beyond that how that is achieved. I'll take the next one too, just because that was an easy one. Besides PI, can you please give the short list of reasons to get a pre-approval of modifications again? Thank you. So our main ones are no cost extensions, budget reallocations, and changes of PI. We will also sometimes get modifications for the collections being digitized. Like sometimes, for those of you using a vendor, it may end up costing less than initially estimated, and you may want to use those remaining funds to digitize more than initially proposed. We see that occasionally, and you would have to contact us for that, and we would approve a new collections scope for the project. And those materials typically need to be pretty heavily correlated with what you're already digitizing. I would say those are our main modifications. Am I missing anything?
No, I don't think so. No cost extension, budget reallocations, changes to PI, and the change in deliverables is what she was just discussing. And because sometimes what happens is people find that they have duplicates in their collections once they got to the vendor, or sometimes they find out that there was more damage and they need to do more extensive reformatting. These are all the different things that can happen once you start the digitization process. If you do a change in deliverables, say you add more or you save money and you want to add more from the collection, then we would have a few statements that you would have to provide after approval of the modification. But you must always do this before and not after contacting us. If one of the PIs changed institutions and still has a connection to the original institution, should a form be completed? No, it's your PI isn't changing in that instance. However, if you want to update us to a new email or address that we need to have on file for them, you would just send us an information and we would update that information, or you could go and they could well, this depends on if they're in SMAPLY as a collaborator. But if you would just contact us with their updated information, because sometimes we do have to contact the PIs for modification requests, and we would need updated email address and physical address of the PI.
Oh, did we say change in vendor for?
No, we did not. If you do change the vendor, yes, you do need to send a new vendor quote and send in a modification request saying that you're changing the vendor and an updated vendor quote for your digitization. Sorry.
Have you considered creating a space where for recipients to support each other? Have previous cohorts done this informally? We have considered this historically throughout the program, although how we have looked at it has kind of changed post-pandemic. Currently, we do not have a specific plan to facilitate that. What we did do in 2022, I believe,
Yes.
was hold a symposium um, connected to the DLF forum where we had a number of the DHC 18 through 2020 cohort come together. And we are in discussion about tentatively doing something like that for the first couple years of AUV, but that is not a firm plan at the moment. That will be reliant on some funding and other issues, but we are investigating the possibility of bringing people together physically to discuss their projects and processes.
That's in the very, very early
Yes.
possible stages. The focus of the last forum was we've digitized it, what's next? So for those collections. Thank you so much for this. You said that if we are unsure about whether a change requires advance permission, that we can complete the grant modification form and send it with our questions so you can provide us with guidance as long as we leave enough time to do that. Yeah, you know, the grant modification, as you have heard, the process could include so many different types of modification requests. First, I would say, if you have any questions about whether you should fill out the form or not, please email us at hiddencollections@clir.org and tell us what the situation is, and then we'll give you the best guidance moving forward. Other than that, if you know you need a modification request, then you can fill out the form. And if it's not necessary, we'll also let you know that there too.
Yeah, I would say what we get the most that's not necessary is occasionally we get reallocation requests that are either below the threshold of needing an approval or something of the like.
Yeah, especially with collaborative projects. We mainly only deal with the lead organization, and how you move money between collaborating organizations are up to you. We only deal with the one budget that we give you at the onset, and that's the total of all the budget that you submitted. That's all we are interested in, not what you do internally.
If we are changing the proportion of materials from the collections we have already reported, for example, doing less from one collection and more from another, will we need to submit a change form? This is an instance where I would email us and give us some more details. We may need you to do a change of deliverables, but if it's a more minor adjustment, it might not be something that's necessary. We do know that some of these collections are not entirely processed and organized before these processes begin. So there is some flexibility that we expect in how you all handle them.
Yeah, and primarily if they stay within the same project scope and deliverables, and it's a small amount, we wouldn't ask for that.
Yeah, if you thought you had 50 VHS and 25 tapes and you have 30 tapes and 40 VHS, that's not something that you would need to put in a modification for.
These are great questions. Any more questions? Will there be any more, any future webinars for recipients? No, we typically only do one recipient webinar. We will have the notes, this question and answer document, the transcript and the recording of the webinar online, and the slides that you can download. And we usually try to get it up within a week's time of the end of this webinar. And then once you have that, you should have that. And then, as always, we are always in the inbox. We're always here for any questions that you have. Please review your guideline and your handbook. That is your friend, and it has almost every question that you need to answer in it. We can't stress that enough. And share it with all of your PIs and your applicant contact if they're the person that handles the budget for you. And you want to add anything to that, Allison?
No, I'll pop up our closing slide. I know we have a survey.
Yeah, before we go, I want to make note of a super short survey that I included in the chat regarding this webinar. And this is part of our program assessment. So your honest feedback on the webinar will help us in our future support efforts. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll be posting the recording and slides soon to our Management Award page. And in the meantime, if you think of any additional questions, you can always reach us at hiddencollections@clir.org. We look forward to working with you and hope you all have a great day.